journalist's book Randis Prize exposes how skeptics distort evidence for paranormal activity. As long as works of fiction about girls with dragon tattoos and such things appeal to the masses, it is unlikely that a meaningful book like Randis Prize will ever make it to the bestseller list. But in my mind, at least, this book by British journalist Robert McLuhan should be at the very top of the list. Subtitled What Skeptics Say About the Paranormal, Why They Are Wrong, and Why It Matters, this book deals with things that go to the very core of our existence, and which either give meaning to life, or, in their absence, suggest that we live in a purely mechanistic universe with no meaning at all. This latter view appears to be that espoused by James the Amazing Randi, a Canadian stage magician, known mostly as a debunker of paranormal claims. Since the 1960s, Randi has offered $1 million to any person who can convince him that he or she possesses psychic powers, but the prize remains unclaimed. An Oxford graduate and member of the Society for Psychical Research, McLuhan, who worked as a foreign correspondent for The Guardian in Spain and Portugal, and now works as a freelance journalist, begins the book as a skeptic, an open-minded one, wondering why Randis Prize has not yet been won. He examines the evidence advanced by psychical researchers and parapsychologists favoring ESP or Psi as well as the survival of consciousness at death, and then looks at the counter-arguments offered by the skeptics. He carefully weighs the evidence for and against and, in most cases, concludes that the skeptics have ignored, twisted, distorted, misinterpreted, disregarded, or otherwise written off the evidence. Robert McLuhan was recently interviewed by email. I gather that you initially found the arguments of the skeptics very persuasive. Yes, they had quite a hold on me for a while. They just seemed so authoritative, and their arguments seemed to be based on solid science. But at the same time, what they said didn't seem to address what people actually say about their experiences, always arguing off point, and it was a real struggle to try to work out where the truth lies. It was quite a while before I felt confident about making up my own mind. I didn't want to feel I was succumbing to wishful thinking, or being superstitious, which is what skeptics always imply. So what swung you the other way? That started to happen when I realized that skeptics don't really engage with the parapsychological research at all, but only with the idea that they have of it, arguing with an imaginary opponent in their own heads. They don't read the literature, so they have only a very vague and general idea of what it is that people report. Not knowing the challenges makes it that much easier to explain it away. You obviously have dug deeply into both the old and the new research, in both the SP and survival. Yes, I spent a few months reading general books around consciousness, and so on, and noticed several references to the Society for Psychical Research. So I decided to check it out, and found that it has a really good little library in central London, packed with useful books, and also its own quarterly publications going back to 1882. It's a real treasure trove of research on kinds of paranormal topics. I had not realized that so much scientific work has been done into things like ghosts, mediums, and telepathy. It was a real eye-opener. And yet the skeptics continually insist that there is no evidence. Strange, isn't it? I don't blame people for feeling skeptical about paranormal claims. In fact, I think we should approach the subject with a good deal of caution. But it really makes you wonder about the extent that some scientists are prepared to go to, for instance saying that there is no evidence whatever for psychic functioning. That makes no sense to me at all, if you consider all the thousands of reports and studies and investigations that have been carried out over more than a century, and which are published in specialist peer-reviewed journals. There is an enormous literature. If they wanted to say there is no scientific evidence, that's something I would contest, but at least we could have a conversation about it. Or that they are not convinced by the evidence, that would be fair enough too. But to say there is not any evidence is just silly, and I think rather disqualifies them from being taken seriously. So, in a nutshell, what is your take on Randi and his $1 million challenge? I actually don't talk about Randi or the challenge in the book very much, which I know might seem strange, since I've used them for the title. I just thought Randis Prize was a useful metaphor for a certain kind of skeptical attitude, which is what I was critiquing. In general terms, I would have liked to focus on this a bit more, particularly the question, why no one has won the prize. This could be for some quite mundane reasons, for instance, that the organizers make it really difficult for contestants, in terms of laying down conditions and taking them out of their comfort zone, which from their point of view I suppose is justified. I guess the high-profile psychics, who might have a chance of winning, are already doing well for themselves as TV performers, and they have a lot to lose and nothing much to gain by risking their reputations. It would make no sense for them, considering how much James Randi himself would have to lose by endorsing anyone as genuine his reputation. I mean, not the money, which I don't think his actually has. But it's still an interesting question. In the end, though, I don't think you can answer it properly without understanding the whole background to the controversy, which is extremely complex. And that's really what my book is all about. To me, the research carried out by pioneers of the SPR, such as Barrett, Myers, Lodge, Hodgson, and Hyslop, is very impressive and as solid today as it was then. Yet, it is filed away in dust-covered cabinets. Do you agree? But it is strange the way that historians and biographers have such a distorted view of their work. I've recently been reading reviews of a new book by John Gray, a British political philosopher, which debunks people in the late 19th and early 20th century who, he says, chased after dreams of immortality, among them people like Myers and Sidgwick, co-founders of the SPR. Typically, he presents them as oddballs and eccentrics. No one ever questions why they reason the way they did, or relates it to their actual work. They are just labeled as crackpots. You discuss the supposed debunking by C.E.M. Hansel, a British psychologist, of the Raymond Lodge group photo. I think this is so typical of the way the skeptics conveniently slant the evidence. Note: Raymond communicated with his father and mother through two mediums after his death, and reference to military unit photo taken just before his death on the battlefield, mentioning that he was sitting with the walking stick across his legs, and the officer behind him was leaning on him. At the time, the lodges had not seen the photo, but it later arrived in the mail. Hansel dismissed the photo as coincidence, and made no mention of the officer behind Raymond leaning on him. Yes, that's something that skeptics do a lot. They misrepresent the original details, and in so doing make it ripe for debunking. But I singled that instance out, because I think there is an interesting mental process there. I used to think they did it deliberately, but actually I think that's often not the case. When they read it, they unconsciously strip out the paranormal element, so that they literally cannot see what the fuss is about. It's a sort of coping mechanism. Or maybe it's just lying, denialism, a habit in some personality types. Actually, I think we all do it, and perhaps that's a healthy thing, healthy skepticism, if you like. When we read about an allegedly paranormal incident, our minds are working to try to provide a normal explanation. But where some of us stay true to the original, others alter it to make a normal explanation easier to identify. Commonly called lying, a lifestyle choice. And then the skeptics who know nothing of the case, read Hansel's words, and accept what he has to say as gospel, although I am not sure that word is in their vocabulary. Yes, exactly. That's what is so interesting. The literature is full of alleged exposes, confessions, and explanations which actually, when you scrutinize them, don't amount to much at all, and may only have existed in the imaginations of the skeptics, who described them, arguing with an imaginary opponent in their own head. But, in some cases, like this one concerning Hansel, you can actually see the process occurring, by comparing the original with the skeptic's bowdlerized version. As you mention in the book, The Attack of Randi, on the research by Dr. Gary Schwartz, is a good example of more modern research, in the area of mediumship, that has been twisted by the skeptics. James Randi's critique of Schwartz really doesn't amount to much. I don't get the impression that he is interested in the details of these studies, if he ever was. He just looses off a tirade of complaints and abuse. He is really just acting up for his audience. Criticisms are fair enough, when they are cogent, and address the issues. But Randi is more in the category of a propagandist. He has already got his audience. They don't care about the details either, they just want a champion to voice their own gut feelings. It often seems to me that these so-called skeptics are unable to distinguish religion from general psychic phenomena. Would you agree? Up to a point. To be fair, Psychic phenomena imply for many people the existence of a spiritual dimension to existence, so religious issues are naturally present, particularly with regard to afterlife, which skeptics find impossible to believe. Does it not seem to you like psychical researchers and parapsychologists are forced to continually reinvent the wheel? Well, that is the nature of the game. As long as a substantial section of society disbelieves in what they report, then they will struggle to even get a hearing. But yes, it is amazing that the work that has been done is still so little known. As I say in my book, after a century and a half of investigations, if we talk about it all, we are still like children asking each other after lights out, do you believe in ghosts? The knowledge is there, however, inconclusive, but we have chosen to disregard it. Why do you think that is? That to me is the million-dollar question. That's perhaps not so strange when you consider how difficult it is to accept. Those of us who have become used to the idea of telepathy, for instance, and have the reading, and even the personal experience, to back it up, are not fazed by it. But it may actually scare some people. Skeptics talk about wishful thinking, but that works both ways. Some people are clearly disturbed by the idea of their minds being open for others to read, or of existing for eternity in an sterile and static afterlife. It may also be that we have a natural disposition, some more than others, obviously, to explain it away. It's the way our minds work to tell us that what we saw yesterday that we thought was paranormal was actually a trick. There is also the fact that psychic phenomena is so hard to pin down to the satisfaction of science. The claim is extraordinary, but the evidence is not extraordinary enough to make it stick. And then, of course, if psychic phenomena is held to validate religious belief, that's difficult in a world in which democracy and secularism are natural bedfellows. No one wants to go back to the old days of warfare between religious factions. Those of us who believe psychic phenomena to be real may not see the danger of that, but I think some skeptics do. And I also think those fears are not necessarily irrational. Online skeptics never reveal this many thought connections. Thank you, Robert. Any final thoughts? Yes. I am very struck by the absence of any serious comment about these things, at least here in Britain. Obviously, the paranormal is a huge subject for novels, films, and TV dramas. There are loads of books about it being published all the time, lots of websites following it, groups carrying out investigations, and so on. But it's all on the level of popular culture. Here, it is vanishingly rare to see anything relating to the paranormal to be discussed in an upmarket newspaper. Intellectuals and opinion makers agonize about the role of religion in society, but almost always from the narrow faith perspective of the Christian or atheist. For them, the paranormal is still unproven at best, or at worst a silly irrelevance. I would like to see that change. That's why I wrote Randis Prize, to try to draw their attention to something that ought to have a huge impact on our thinking, if it was better understood. I particularly want them to see through the myths and generalizations propagated by skeptics, and encourage them to look at the scientific research. Robert McLuhan can be found at paranormalia.com, and Randis Prize is available from Amazon, subtitled What Skeptics Say About the Paranormal, Why They Are Wrong, and Why It Matters. Excellent interview, Michael. I agree that Randis Prize is a major contribution that should be read by everyone with an interest in this subject. But don't be too hard on those dragon tattoo books. They are really quite good. Michael Prescott.